Hello and welcome back to another edition of GNAT-TV's In-Depth series. I'm Andrew McKeever, the news director at GNAT-TV's News Project, and it's a pleasure to have you with us today on Monday, March 3rd. It's town meeting week, and we're very fortunate to have with us today two of our local state representatives who are here for their town meeting week break, mid-session at the state legislature. Here with us in the studio, we're really pleased to be joined today by Chris Morrow, who is a state representative from the, let me see if I can get this right here, the Wyndham, Bennington, Windsor district.
That's correct.
That includes the towns of Winhall, Londonderry, Andover, and Weston.
Very good.
Got them all. All right. We're doing well here. And also Kathleen James. Welcome back, Kathleen. Good to see you again. Kathleen is one of the members of the two-member Bennington 4 district that includes the towns of Manchester, Arlington, Sandgate, and part of Sunderland. Kathleen, Chris, thanks again for making the time to come down and bring us up to speed on what's been going on up in Montpelier the last couple of months. I guess the big item that has probably been talked about the most and is probably of the most interest to most of our viewers would be the education overhaul proposal that Governor Scott unveiled back in January, I guess. It's a rather sweeping proposal, I think it's fair to say. It would really dramatically change the way we structure the education infrastructure here in the state, going from 52 supervisory unions and 119 school districts down to 5 large regional school districts. And there's a lot to unpack here, so I think I'll let you guys speak to that. I mean, there are two of the elements that seemed most interesting to me is this foundation formula that would be the financing mechanism for how we'd pay for education in the state. And I'm sure a lot of this proposal was driven by the results of last year's concerns around property tax increases and how that just was becoming unaffordable. And then the other piece, of course, would be the consolidation idea. Local control has been a big part of the landscape for education here in the state for probably about as long as there's been a Vermont. And this would definitely change that to some degree. But why don't I stop there? And Kathleen, perhaps you can get us started here. What stands out to you in this new proposal?
Well, I think the first thing that I always like to make sure folks understand is where we are in the process and how we got here. So you had already mentioned, Andrew, that last year's rising property tax rates statewide were very concerning for a lot of voters, and with good reason. And so I think that the rising cost of education and the way we fund our schools has really reached a boiling point. And I think a lot of voters, and certainly Governor Scott, made it a top priority in the November 2024 election to make sure that legislators were listening and that we understood that we need to take some meaningful steps to try to kind of bend the curve on how much our schools cost, or how Vermonters are being asked to pay for them, right? How we're feeling that in our household budgets. And so that legitimate drumbeat brought us to where we are now. One thing that's very different this time around, this session, is that the governor has really come out strong with a proposal that he is delivering to the legislature, and that's new, and I think a very welcome approach, so that we can all try to work together. The governor delivered in late January a very high-level 17-page, I'll call it an outline. And it was the broad strokes of where he thinks we should go. And then only a couple days ago did the legislature receive an actual bill from Governor Scott. So we're already a couple months into the legislative session, and we received a detailed 194-page bill on Wednesday or Thursday. And the House Education Committee is starting to really dive into the details of this bill. I think for every question it answers, it raises 10 more. And in the meantime, the House is probably going to take Governor Scott's bill. They've been taking testimony on these broad ideas for weeks. And I think that you'll see the House try to develop its own bill and try to pass something out in late March or early April. That, of course, will then move over to the Senate, and the Senate will probably tear it up and start over and develop its own bill, with the thought being that maybe we can try to get something passed this year. I think the one thing that I'm very concerned about is that in the governor's bill, the pace at which he's trying to drive change feels very unrealistic to me, and it's too fast, I think, to try to come up with a proposal that really works that achieves all we're trying to achieve. And anyway, you already mentioned, Andrew, some of the broad components of the governor's plan are to move from 119 districts to 5. And then there's a profoundly game-changing shift from the process we have now, where local school districts develop budgets, local voters approve those budgets. Essentially, you add it all up, and the legislature is required to set the tax rates necessary to pay for all of that, to a completely different system in which the state determines an adequate amount of per pupil spending. Right now, the number that the governor has proposed is about $13,000 a year per pupil. And then you weight that for student population. So if you have a lot of students who need, for example, English language learning services, if you have a very rural district, if you have a lot of students living in poverty who often need to draw down more services, you adjust accordingly, and districts get that money, and there's your budget. So it's some very big changes.
The districts could appropriate more money out of their own local buckets, right, if they wanted to supplement the $13,000 roughly dollar foundation formula.
Yeah.
Within a limit, though, because that gets into that tricky place with the Brigham decision from 1997 that set up Act 60 and the effort to make sure that there was equity amongst all the education districts, whether or not a town was affluent or
Yep. It's interesting, if you read the governor's bill, there's kind of a statement about halfway through, there's a statement of purpose or intent, and it says, the intent of this bill is to comply with Brigham. And then,
Okay.
and then later, it does allow local districts the ability, well, not local districts, it allows districts, so
they'll be writ large.
The ability for voters to approve a higher level of spending within some sort of cap, and that money would be raised locally and returned locally if voters approve that across the district, is my understanding. So,
Chris, what's your takeaway on all of this?
This is all still completely up in the air, people. And there's a survey out now that the House leadership has asked people to take, so that people have a good format to weigh in on their concerns about education. And Kathleen's point about the timing is really crucial, because for me, as a new legislator, this is something that I didn't quite realize, is the pace of action in Montpelier. Is, to get a new bill drafted, they want it in by the end of January. So you've been there 3 weeks, and then you have basically February to review it and take testimony, and then vote it out by the end of next week to go to the Senate, really. So people think you're up there for 5 months, but really, to try to get something done, it's a short amount of time. And so, having just gotten the governor's bill last week, even though we had an idea and this broad structure, it's very hard for a citizen legislature to take this on something of this scope and do it in a matter of weeks. So I think we do need to have a measured approach and do it right. There's so much at stake with this, and how it plays out, we'll see. It's still very much up in the air, and we're thankful that the governor did come to the table with the outline of an approach, and I think there's some broad agreement around some of those elements. But we have a lot of work to do yet.
I mean, what would be the problem if it did stretch out into the second year of the biennium? I mean, is there any kind of absolute necessity that this bill would have to be passed by both houses and signed by the governor by the end of May or whenever the session ends, just to get the ball rolling? Or why couldn't we take the time to really have a more thoughtful, or, well, have a more in-depth approach, shall we say, and make sure that, you know, whatever comes out at the end is indeed something that's going to be workable for the foreseeable future?
I think that's crucial. So, you know, the question is, I had mentioned earlier that the House will try to pass something out by late March. Basically, the education bill has been given extra time. Usually our crossover date, that's that date Chris mentioned, where bills have to leave the House and move to the Senate or vice versa. It's March 14th. The House has been given a couple extra weeks. But in general, the thought that we would try to figure this all out in the time we have just feels like a non-starter to me. But the answer to your question about what's the rush? Well, you know, voters are anyway, what I heard all last year from voters was a very clear message that we need to get a handle on property taxes. And so I think there's political pressure to do something about property taxes. But what I'm hearing now, and I'm glad, is a lot of people saying, look, wait a minute, you know, these are very big, important decisions. We had a community forum at Arlington last night, Rob Hunter and I, and it was fantastic. The gym was packed. There were, I counted 130 people there, 2 hours of conversation about what this would mean for a community like Arlington. And there are conversations going on about what this means for our sending towns too, right? For our town tuition towns. And so I would hope, if I could wave a magic wand, maybe there's some short-term stopgap things we can do about property taxes this year to try to buy some time, and take next year to start rolling out, you know, a thoughtful approach. The governor's bill calls for some of these changes to be happening in this year and next year, and for the new districts to be in place by 2027. And I don't support that.
That's ambitious. And Chris, before we leave the subject, because there's so many other things I'd love to hear from you all about, I'm just wondering what have you been hearing from your constituents up in the mountain towns? I'm thinking particularly of Winhall, which is a non-operating district, right? They don't have their own school, but it's a choice community. Kids can go wherever. Is this being greeted with cheers or scowls of concern?
No, I think the Winhall situation is they're very concerned about the governor's proposal, and the House proposal. I mean, they're just concerned about the uncertainty of all this and where it's going to fall. We should mention that Senator Seth Bungartz has a proposal that came out last week as well, which is a lot different in terms of the map of the state and districts and SUs than the governor's proposal, and it's much more flexible for tuitioning towns and independent schools. So that is worth a look for people who are interested in delving into this. So there are various proposals out there, but yeah, we want to make sure that our non-operating and tuitioning towns are not lost in this. And honestly, in Montpelier, there's so many people that have no experience in with an independent school in their district that it's very easy for them to get caught up in the just public school or nothing mindset. And so I've been having multiple conversations with people just trying to explain how well it works for us, for me, for my kids, for you know, a lot of our towns, that you know, it's a seamless transition from public to independent school, and it works. But that's an uphill battle in Montpelier, just because people don't have experience with it, and so it's something foreign. but we're working on it.
Yeah, well, that whole school choice element is another interesting dynamic that I know has been talked about down here already quite a bit, and I'd love to explore that some more. But I think why don't we move on to some of the other things that you folks are involved with? And one of the things I wanted to talk about was this new committee that was formed.
That we're both on.
That you're both on. The was it Energy and Digital Infrastructure?
Yep.
And Kathleen, you're the chair of that committee. I guess what is the purpose of the committee? What's its mission? What are you up to?
Well, it's as I understand it, it was a committee that existed in some form before and took a biennium off, and they had combined it with the energy issues with the Environment Committee, and that turned out to be too much. And so now they wisely pulled it back out. And so it's kind of an interesting combination, energy and digital infrastructure. They don't always overlap, but we've done, Kathleen, as a new chair, has done a fantastic job.
Hey.
It's a hard job being a committee chair because you're corralling, in her case, you know, a very vocal independent, a few Democrats, including a little overzealous, arrogant one from the mountain towns, and then some interesting Republicans who are very nice, but also very anti-environment. Not anti-environment. They're anti adding any cost to anything. So it's hard to differentiate between an expense and an investment. This is the way I think about it. But anyway, I mean, it's a hard job, and Kathleen's done an amazing job getting us. For us, there's 5 freshman legislators on a committee of 9. So we've spent a lot of time doing foundational testimony, which has been very helpful on both the energy side and the digital infrastructure side. And we just last week passed out a bill to help the Agency of Digital Services report in a way that is helpful for us as a committee to provide oversight. That's one of our main functions, to provide oversight over the digital infrastructure, IT element of state government, which unfortunately has a difficult history. We've spent hundreds of millions of dollars and continue to, and need to a certain extent, but the oversight and systematic approach to that has not been there over the years. So the Agency of Digital Services was formed, what, 6 years?
6 or 7 years ago.
And they've had 3 different agency heads, and so we're just kind of getting to the point now where there's some good integration and systematic approach, and so but it needs oversight. So that's a big part of our job. And I'll let Kathleen talk about the energy side of things. But
yeah, it was exciting. Chris mentioned we just passed our first bill, 9-0, unanimously out of committee, which was my goal. You know, the scope of the IT work is, I think I remember that right now ADS is actively monitoring 53 IT projects across state government that total more than $700 million in expenditures over the next couple of years. So, you know, things like the folks may remember during COVID when the Department of Labor's UI, unemployment insurance mainframe, 50-year-old mainframe, basically melted down. And they're in the process now of replacing that. And those are the kind of projects that we're keeping an eye on. So, but you also, Chris turned it over to me for energy. So that's been very interesting. We've taken a lot of foundational testimony, as Chris mentioned. We're taking a look at a bill that we may be passing out next week that would help us try to get a better look at Vermont's energy economy. How are we making the transition, you know, as the world and the country and our state kind of shifts to renewable energies? How's Vermont doing? And are there areas where people are getting left behind? Areas maybe where you know, the closest gas station is, you know, far away, but you can't find an EV charger. And so that's an interesting bill that we've been working on. And I think, Andrew, I know you'd wanted to ask about the clean heat standards. So That was I'm sure folks will remember, that was a very controversial bill, the Affordable Heat Act, that the legislature passed in 2023. And at its most basic, it would have set up a credit market in which fuel dealers would have purchased credits based on the number of gallons of fossil fuels sold. They could have bought those credits or earned them. And then all of those revenues raised would have been funneled into very deep incentives or discounts to help Vermonters, especially low and moderate income Vermonters, do things like weatherize their homes. And the idea gets really I think to the heart of what we're trying to accomplish here with our climate work. I think people get, when we track our climate process in terms of greenhouse gas emissions, that's the metric we use to see if we're making progress on cutting down pollution. But I think it distracts, it's an important metric, but Chris said something, about investments. And I think we lose sight of the fact that climate work is really at its very heart. This is work that unfolds one household, one Vermonter at a time, when we try to help people save money by weatherizing their homes, save money by putting in a more efficient heating system, save money on gas by buying an EV. But these are high upfront costs that not everybody can afford. And so it's how can we help more people save money in the long run by doing these things? And the Clean Heat Standard was a controversial way to try to do that. We did some unprecedented things when we passed the Affordable Heat Act. One was, instead of just implementing it, we asked the Public Utility Commission to basically draft it and to come back to us this past January with a study on what it would cost, how much it would benefit, whether it was a workable idea for Vermont. And they did deliver that report. The good news was that contrary to the postcards that people received during the campaign from opponents saying that it would cost $4 a gallon, the actual impact on the price of heating fuel would have been 8 cents a gallon in the first year, rising to 58 cents a gallon in year 10. Not nothing, but certainly not $4 a gallon. But the PUC also pointed out some problems with the program that we knew were problems, which was that it was complicated. So the second unprecedented thing that we built into the bill was a provision that the Clean Heat Standard couldn't be implemented unless this year's legislature or a future legislature developed a new bill from scratch, took testimony. The bill passed the House, passed the Senate, and was signed by the governor. And because of that check back, the Clean Heat Standard is on, I'd say it's on major hold right now. Nobody's working on that bill. There are no plans to work on that bill. So the Clean Heat Standard is on ice. And we will try to, I think, look for other ways to deal with the core problem, which is that, right now when the price of propane or the price of fuel oil spikes, or there's not much that folks can do about the heating fuel bill that they receive. And right now it's hard for a lot of people to be able to afford to do things like weatherize their homes. And so we'll try to look for other ways to help people with those important investments.
One thing that I didn't realize that I found out up in Montpelier was that we've actually done a very good job with the electricity sector in terms of greenhouse gases. It's now less than 3% of our greenhouse gas emissions come out of the electricity sector. Our two biggest sectors by far are transportation and heating, and that's why that was the genesis of this, is that we've done a really good job on the electricity side, but we have these two other big parts of our economy, transportation and heating, thermal issues that we need to work on. And they are interrelated, of course, as we have more heat pumps and EVs, that affects the electricity grid and all that sort of thing. But really, the electricity side is well under control compared to transportation and thermal.
One bill that might be making its way over from the Senate, unclear, but it could be one that we could really get some bipartisan support on, would allow Efficiency Vermont, which currently focuses almost all of its work on helping people save on their electric bills, on energy efficiency, allowing Efficiency Vermont to do more work in the thermal sector. In other words, get more involved in helping people weatherize and, you know, install heat pump hot water heaters. Or so we'll see. The Senate's working on that bill, and I'd be excited if it came over so that we could start taking some testimony.
I'm wondering, you know, there's a new administration in Washington that doesn't seem to be quite as keen around renewable energy as the one before. Is there likely to be some difficulty getting towards some of the goals you'd like to see around renewable energy, or, you know, some of the hoped for benefits that might have come out of the Clean Heat Standard, when in Washington the emphasis is much more on slowing down whatever might be going on and drill baby drill and all that kind of thing? Is that going to be a factor, do you think, at this level, or you know, hey, we'll work around it?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, already there was a very robust plan to roll out fast chargers at 12 key locations across the state. And that was mostly going to be done with federal money, and we got one done, and the 11 other ones are now on hold because of the administration's action. So we have a plan to electrify our economy through the renewable energy standard, and if people don't have enough places to charge their vehicles, then that obviously puts a crimp on the rollout of that. So there are all sorts of implications to what's going on at the federal government. That's just kind of one example.
Yeah, we've also heard testimony on, there's I think, fantastic federal grant program called Solar for All, and Vermont was going to stand to benefit, tens of millions of dollars to help put start generating some more solar energy in, the right places around Vermont. That money's on hold, and planning is on hold while we wait to hear about that. And some federal funds to expand rural broadband are also on hold. So it's interesting in, I think, not a good way. But federal funding, right now, Vermont spends about $8.7 billion a year. That's our total annual spending is about $8.7 billion. And 36% of that, $3 billion a year, comes from the federal government. And so especially, I'm sort of nervously watching as Congress works on its budget, because the budget that the House Republicans passed in D.C. Earlier this week would contemplate, or at least raise the question of, some potentially really deep cuts to Medicaid and SNAP food benefits and public education. And Vermont is heavily reliant on those dollars. So across committees, what we're doing right now, Vermont always passes a balanced budget. It's not required of us. It's interesting. We're one of the few states that doesn't require a balanced budget in state law, but we always do it anyway. And so as the House Appropriations Committee works on passing the state budget this year, they're asking every committee to take a look at areas in their budget where cuts in federal spending could blow a hole in our state budget. And we could be facing some very, very difficult decisions to try to fill those gaps with money that we don't have as a state, or cut back services that especially vulnerable Vermonters rely on. So we are not in a great place. It feels right now like we're sort of at the mercy of the federal government.
And then we have the tariffs to think about.
Yeah.
We're recording this on Monday. Tomorrow is when the tariffs are theoretically going to be reinstated. And Green Mountain Power, as you know, gets a large chunk of its power from Hydro-Quebec in Canada. And so I think that that was going to be a 10% tariff on that energy. So if that goes through, then those kinds of things will have an impact. Not to mention, there's a 25% tax on aluminum. I heard this morning that would increase the cost of a Ford F-150 pickup by $3,000. Just the aluminum part, and there's a lot of car parts being made in Canada and Mexico and coming across the border. So it's very it's far-reaching, and it's also a little hard to understand the full ramifications of all the tariffs and the dynamics that will affect Vermonters.
Yeah,
And
our
to say nothing of
utilities.
the
I'm sorry.
tourism factor. A lot of Canadians come down to Vermont for, even down to this end of the state for, vacations and what have you. And it'll be interesting to see how much of an impact that is on local businesses here.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's tragic, actually. The impact on, our relationship with our close ally and our friends and our neighbors, it's sad.
Well, before we have to run, I wanted to ask you, Chris, you're a member of the Rural Caucus. Before we leave on this, sort of difficult note, tell us a little bit about the Rural Caucus. Is that a group of legislators? I'm assuming it's a tripartisan group that concerns itself with the small towns in Vermont.
It is a tripartisan group. There's 3 co-chairs, one independent and one from each party. And we meet once a week usually and hear from various organizations and constituents from around the country focused on rural issues. And so it's been very interesting learning opportunity for me. My district is very rural, and so a lot of the items that come up are relevant. For instance, in the Act 250 reform bill that got passed in the last session, a lot of that bypasses towns that don't have water and sewer, municipal water and sewer, except there's one exemption. If you have the correct soils, you can use that as an exemption to build. So we're exploring the opportunities around housing and education and other things like logging and other issues that affect small rural Vermonters. And so it's been, and then we make a recommendation. We choose a few items that we want to push in our letter to the Appropriations Committee to include in the budget. And so it's a really interesting, good group of people, and trying to make the voices of rural Vermont heard, because as you know, most of the leadership in the House comes from Chittenden County, and so sometimes those rural voices get lost.
The entire state isn't like South Burlington, huh? Well, okay. Well, I'll have to leave it there for today. I think we could easily talk for another half hour about all the various other things you've got going on up in Montpelier, but that just means we'll have to have you come back at the end of the session and give us the final report as to how all this stuff worked out.
Be happy to.
But then we'll hopefully know a lot more about all of it. But anyway, we'll leave it there for now. But once again, wanted to thank Kathleen James and Chris Morrow, 2 state legislators from down our way, and also to thank you as well for being with us today. Hope you found our show interesting, and we'll see you again the next time. Thank you very much.